Hey, I'm Michael Bean.
I'm Jonathan Bean.
And this is the first video for our Empathy and Vulnerability channel. John, what I would love to hear you talk about first is the piece that you sometimes do in workshops about the definition of empathy and where its value is.
Sure. As an example, psychology has a really good definition of empathy that's been around since about the 1950s. And the rough paraphrase of it is empathy is the ability to experience someone else's emotional state as if it was your own without losing the as-if quality. And the use for that definition, and one of the reasons that it's stood the test of time, is because in a therapeutic context, having that experience where you can relate to someone else's feelings really well but still kind of keep a loving distance and recognize that it's not totally yours, allows the therapist to have insight into what the patient is experiencing in a way that's helpful to the patient. So the definition of it actually guides useful behavior in a therapeutic context. And so defining something, being clear about what it means, helps you understand how to use it. The actual definition of empathy is really tough to pin down. It's a word that's kind of a big, broad scope word like love, where you kind of know what it is. When you talk about it, other people know what you're talking about, but it's really challenging to say that you've completely described it. It's very challenging to say that you've completely described what empathy actually is. But having a definition of it in the context where you're using it lets you do it better, kind of lets you understand when you've successfully crossed the finish line. There are a couple of other definitions of empathy, like being able to take a guess successfully at what someone else is feeling. Just that can be described as empathy. There's another piece to it, from my perspective, where you also have to care about it and do something about it, in addition to just guessing what's going on with somebody else. Because if you don't express empathy, the other person doesn't experience empathy. There's no actual connection if you have an understanding of what's going on for somebody else, but you don't take any action. And if you take action, but the other person feels worse or doesn't feel understood, what you've done probably is not empathy. It's a good indicator. So again, defining it and understanding what it is you mean when you use that word is part of doing it in a way that works.
And then so much of it is about whether it is received as empathy, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, if you express empathy to somebody in a way where they don't receive it as empathy, you're not doing it right, basically. I mean, some people, when they're in a particular state, they just can't receive another person. So if somebody's panicked or scared or freaking out, then you can provide them with some understanding and compassion, and they may not be ready to receive it.
Right.
That is a time to understand, and often when people try to provide empathy and it's not received well, they kind of get worried. And then your stress adds to that other person's stress. The fear that I'm not doing it right actually makes it harder for the other person to go through the experience they're going through.
Right.
So there's an aspect of it where it's actually being in service. Like, you have to actually stay connected to your results if you're trying to provide empathy. Because if you try and provide empathy and all you do is stress out over whether or not you're doing it right and stress the other person out more, it's not really empathy.
And so often it's as simple as just listening, which is the basis for a lot of the witnessing and holding space that we do in our workshops.
Yeah. I would say that there's a step in addition to listening that's necessary, like just receiving and just understanding. Yeah, there's like a certain amount of opening in human connection.
Yeah.
Where if that happens and both people feel it, then empathy is taking place.
And I've heard you list off some of the things, the outcomes that you think are connected to empathy, and I'd love to hear those here.
I'm not actually sure what you mean.
I just mean the places where empathy is meaningful and valuable, where there's empirical evidence for empathy being useful.
I see, right. Well, when empathy has been studied in an academic context, as an example, empathy in doctors improves patient outcomes. So they have better adherence to treatment plans, their health improves more quickly. When teachers offer more empathy to their students, the teachers are rated better, the students generally have better grades. When empathy is part of, there are really no circumstances that I've found that empathy makes worse. and it is pretty much universally of benefit in every place where it's been studied. Like, greater human connection makes it more possible. And in my anecdotal experience in the corporate world, empathy between an employer and an employee, people don't quit their jobs, people quit their bosses. And so if you're a cold, calculating, awful boss who has no empathy, you lose your staff.
Right.
And so the presence of it improves things, the absence of it makes things worse, generally speaking.
John is a soft skills and empathy trainer for BC Crown Corporation.
I teach people to be nice for a living.
Okay. That's probably enough for video number 1.